But just by means of introduction, my name is Dion de Swat. I'm one of the managing partners at Africa People Advisory Group, based in Cape Town, but actually currently dialing in from Johannesburg. We are busy with a job evaluation project, so I'm sitting at a client site for the hour. So welcome to the call today. And I'm going to just briefly hand over to Ronelle, who will be my co-presenter, just to do an introduction from her side. Ronelle, over to you.
Morning, everybody. Thank you, Dion. I'm Ronelle Camacho, also managing partner at Africa People Advisory Group, South Africa. Our focus is in the South African side of the business. It's a chilly morning in Pretoria. So, Dion, I don't know how much colder you are in Johannesburg, but Pretoria is cold. We are feeling the snow that was felt in the northern, eastern, and western Cape. So it's starting to sort of subside and getting a little bit warmer here in the middle of almost spring.
Thanks so much, Ronelle. If I wasn't presenting a webinar and I was in the Western Cape, I definitely would have been in serious playing in the snow, that's for sure. It doesn't happen that often. So welcome to everybody. We are going to kick off to make sure that we can spend the hour in a very, very productive manner. So what we are going to be doing today is we'll be sharing with you the results from our third annual thought leadership study. And as I mentioned, I'll be co-presenting with Ronelle, who will be taking a large part of the chunk of the conversation today. But let me start easing you into what it is that we want to talk about today. So the key theme for our study this year is deploying a framework for introducing an employee experience journey in Africa. Over the last 2 years, we've really been talking about new ways of working, with the advent of technology and COVID, which has started to subside quite a bit. We wanted to really change direction as far as our study is concerned. And over the last few years, employee experience has been a very, very big theme, not only in Africa, but across the world. And I think there's been lots of kind of studies that have covered EX, but no studies that we are aware of that covers the African continent. So it's a really important piece of research for us. Now, what we've done over the last few years is we've tried to understand in Africa to what extent, people in HR and people in line know what EX is all about. And so what we want to do is we want to start with a poll. Oliver, who's supporting us in the background, is going to launch a poll. And in this poll, what we'd like to know is your understanding of EX. And we want you to choose one of these. So in your view, do you consider EX to be, essentially the same as employee engagement, which means it's a survey with some action plan? Do you think it's a term that describes how people feel in an organization? Do you feel it's a cross-functional effort to design people processes with employees at the center? Or are you not sure? And I'm sure there are some people that haven't really come across the term and that might wonder, what is this thing that people are talking about? What is EX? So as we progress with the conversation, we are going to be talking about EX as opposed to employee experience, because that is kind of the recognized term. So we've got roughly 120 people in the meeting at this point in time. And we are just looking at the votes. We're about 54, 55% of people that have voted. We're going to give it a little bit more time to try and get up to about 70% of votes. So let's see how we progress. And then we will end the poll and share the results with you. So I'll give it a bit more time. We're up to about 65%, about 80 people that have voted so far. We'll give it a little bit more time just to get a proper response here and see to what extent our continent is aligned with an understanding of what employee experience is all about. So I'm going to end the poll here and then share the results with you, and hopefully it will be coming up on your screen. So what we see in the first case, essentially it's the same as employee engagement, which is a survey. We had about 12% of votes there. It's a term that describes how people feel in an organization, 31% of votes. Majority of votes, 52%. It's a cross-functional effort to design people processes with employees at the center. And about 5% of people said we're actually not sure. And the correct answer is where the 52% of votes would lie. So it really is a cross-functional effort to design your people processes with employees right at the center. And that is what we are going to be unpacking in our conversation today. Right. I just want to close the poll quickly and just get back to make sure that I'm sharing my screen. Okay, so let's jump into it. We just want to give you a brief introduction to Africa People Advisory Group, or APAG for short. If you haven't worked with us, you haven't engaged with us in the past, so we are a Pan-Africa human resources advisory firm. There's a couple of pictures of how we travel the continent delivering work. And we would also encourage you to follow our LinkedIn page, and Oliver will also drop a note to our WhatsApp group. So what are we all about? We really are focused on two things. We focused on people as far as the human resources profession is concerned, and we are also very, very focused on the continent of Africa. And so it's really important for us to get out to the continent, to the countries, to get to learn a lot more about the work that happens in human resources. And so we've got a very simple philosophy as far as our value proposition is concerned. We want to make sure that we help organizations to attract the best people to come and work for them. We want to make sure that when people are there, they give them full selves, so they are fully committed to the organization. So there's high levels of engagement and commitment. We want to make sure that people choose to stay and deliver. So the efforts around retention and making sure that we support organizations in creating the right kind of culture is really critical. And of course, all of this is to make sure that businesses are successful, that businesses flourish, and they are productive and profitable entities if their endeavor is, of course, to be profitable as an organization. So that's a little bit more about ourselves. Now, what we're going to cover in terms of the conversation today is I'll do a short introduction just to talk about the way in which the work of human resources has changed. You know, if I think about my career in HR, it's now fundamentally different to where it was many years ago. We'll give you a little bit of background to the study, just some demographics of, you know, who participated, where are they from, and then we are going to share with you a model that we have developed as far as employee experience for Africa is concerned. Not to just leave you with a broad concept, but to give you access to an actual model to think about as you start introducing this in your own organization. Out of this survey, we have found five trends that we'll be sharing with you. We'll unpack each of these in a bit more detail. And then we will share with you also just a view from employees, and I'll contextualize the employee view shortly and end with some closing remarks. A couple of comments from my side. The recording of this webinar, together with a slide deck and the actual report, will be made available this afternoon on our website and by email. So if you are participating in the webinar, or if you've registered for the webinar, we will be sending a link where you can go and download the report and also access the recording, and the slide deck will also be available. And then if there's anybody else that has not attended, everything will be available this afternoon on our website, and Oliver will also pop into the chat box a link to our website. So let's talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've seen over the last couple of years in the human resources profession. So in starting to think about the webinar, I wanted to start thinking about, well, where do all of these trends come from, and how long have they been here? And I thought the 4-day work week was the most recent one, because that's a very hot topic at this point in time. But what I found in my research is that the 4-day work week actually was started in 1930 already. So that is how old the concept of the 4-day work week is. Then in about 1990, this term of hybrid working was coined. So, you know, we've been talking about hybrid working since kind of the start of COVID, but it's actually also been there for quite a while. New ways of working, which is now a very common and widely used term, was then started in 2019. The Great Resignation, which we reported on last year in 2021, and quiet quitting, which has also been a really big topic in 2022. And the reason why we wanted to talk about all these elements is because all of these have to do with the employee experience that organizations have. And so what we want to do is to make it really practical for you, is to talk about two sisters. And these sisters are Temi and Adora. And Temi and Adora are sisters that recently joined new companies. And so, you know, Temi joined a company called the Green Company, and Adora joined a company called the Red Company. And I want you to think about your own experiences as an employee in your organization, maybe in previous organizations, and to think about how you identify with each of these. I won't cover all of it. It's a lot of content. I'll give you some highlights. So let's look at the recruitment experience. So for Temi, the process was online. She received feedback right throughout the process, and they actually scheduled interviews around her availability. If you look at Adora, the process took 4 months. When she finally received her offer, it was riddled with errors, and she actually had to miss a child's concert as part of this process. And I'm reflecting on some of my own experiences, and actually, there was a point in my career where I almost missed a very important event in my personal life for my daughter because of a culture that I was working within. If you think about onboarding, for Temi, everything was prepared. She knew who she was going to meet. She had a cell phone, laptop, everything set up. And on the first day, they put a bunch of flowers on a desk. For Adora, she didn't have a clue where to park. She couldn't meet a manager until late the afternoon. There was no desk prepared. So a very complicated affair. From a development perspective, for Temi, they scheduled feedback for around her assessment, and they helped her to develop a learning plan to work on her development areas. Whereas for Adora, no feedback. They gave her a blank template with no content for a development plan, and the managers actually cancelled the first meeting that she had in terms of her development plan. If we then look at reward, for Temi, the package was explained. Her manager helped her log in. She received a reward statement. Also, additional benefits like gym and childcare facilities were available. Whereas for Adora, she had no view of take-home pay. There were deductions that never made sense, and in the first month, she was actually paid late. If we look at engagement, if you consider where Temi is at, she participates in an annual engagement survey. There are regular chats with the manager, and the team get together for socials. For Adora, and let me just share that this is an actual experience from a company that I was involved in, the manager stood behind employees as they complete the survey. The results were never shared, and actually what the company did is they removed the annual incentive plan without notice. Tools and technology. So for Temi, she works in a very hybrid model. She has access to all the latest technology, and there's no issue for her to access social media at work. For Adora, she works in a paper-based environment with very high restrictions on access to internet. Then lastly, in terms of leadership, Temi has a leader that follows servant leadership. So the leader's there to support her, and leaders really engage, and she's got open access to Exco. Whereas for Adora, she works in a command and control style, and there's been issues around discipline, and she's been called for a disciplinary hearing for something very minor that she did. So if you think about the experiences, it's a very, very different experience. And that really is what we want to talk about today, is how do you create the right kind of employee experience for people in the organization? So a little bit of background to the study. Over the last 2-3 years, we've been conducting a study that's been focused on a view from employers. So we've been focused on talking to heads of HR, to senior leaders. This year, we added in an employee view. So we did a quick snap survey, 14 questions. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to run an employee survey, which is still the main survey, but we wanted to balance that with a view from employees. And we'll be sharing some of those results with you today. We're very proud that we got about a 10% increase in participation. So we had 206 people that completed from 188 companies, stretching 70 industries and 31 countries. And so the Insight study continues to grow very positively. Main countries that participated, 24% representation from South Africa, 23 from Nigeria, Kenya had 13, Zimbabwe 12, and then there's a cluster of countries, and of course Uganda. And I think a special word of thanks to Brian and the team from the Uganda Human Resources Association for supporting us this year once again. Predominant industry has been financial services, followed by professional services, and then a cluster of other industries. And you can see on the last one that we've got, representation from companies of all sizes. So I'm going to be handing over to Ronelle, and she will be talking us through a model that has emerged out of this exercise. Over to you, Ronelle.
Thank you, Dion. Right, so before we just delve into the model, let's just have a quick look around. There was obviously some context for us to create this model. We did realize that employee experience, although there's been some activity around it, and some understanding around it over the 3 years, it was a fairly new concept. It's unfamiliar. People don't know so much about it. We could see even now in our poll, there was still not 100% alignment on what it is about. We wanted to give guidance around employees that actually starting to get more familiar with the concept and want to actually embark on an employee experience journey. And we also wanted to provide a sort of a baseline to say, this is what you can start off with. And then you would see the model is actually informed, or we've actually derived many of the trends that we are presenting in from the model. If I just take a broad overview of the model, from A to D, and then I will delve into a little bit of the detail around it. We know that everything around employee experience is about a people-centric culture and an environment. A people-centric culture is really enabled through specific people practices that are targeted, that are specifically having the employee at the center of it. And how do you track that? You track that through data and metrics. And that is, in other words, supported by technology, systems, and applications. So if I look at the detail of those concepts, the people-centric culture, we know leadership is at the heart of it. Quality leadership, servant leadership, inspiring people, the environment in which people work, being enabling, being something that gives them authority, empowers them, having meaningful work, making sure that there's congruence between the culture and how they do things and the values of the business, giving people opportunity to innovate, to fail, and making sure that teams relate with each other in a very constructive way. It doesn't mean that there's no conflict, but the team actually collaborate well. Now, what are those practices that actually influence or enable this type of culture, these type of people practices? We specifically look at onboarding, we look at sourcing, we look at employee development, engagement, employee wellness, reward, and then performance management. And we will go into that in a little bit more detail when we unpack some of the trends. But those are the practices that we really identified as the moments that matter in an employee's life cycle with an employer. Data and metrics, we want to focus on high impact metrics. You know, when you measure something just for the sake of measuring it, we need to start asking the questions around what does this measure actually tell me? And then ongoing feedback as a very important, employee feedback as a very important component. Lastly, then, the tools and applications. If we look at the 5 trends, thank you, Dion. 5 trends, number 1, more progress is needed really in Africa to establish people-centric organizational cultures. So there has been some movement, and we will go through the detail, but definitely more progress is needed. There is also a definite step change that we require in terms of people practices. We will go into the detail of people practices. We see that there is a shift, a slow and steady shift from employee engagement to employee experience. There is any report in HR wouldn't be a report if there is no feedback on performance, and the forecast for performance management is actually brighter this time around. And then the last trend that we will be talking about is people data. There's an absolute people data evolution that is on the horizon. If we look at the first trend, more progress that we need in terms of establishing people-centric cultures. Now, we've tracked leadership competencies over the last 3 years, like Dion has indicated in the start when we conducted our studies. And 2 very prominent leadership competencies have emerged. Always communication, effective communication, clear communication, but definitely communication, and then employee development has been the 2 very steady competencies that has resurfaced constantly throughout our measures. And what we've also asked is, now that you've identified certain of these critical competencies, can you rate your leaders on these competencies? And even though there is a slight, incline in terms of the level of competence of leaders, I don't believe that it is really where we want it to be. I think there's definitely a lot that can be done. We've also tracked, what are the other things that leaders can do? Leadership as the core of people-centric cultures. The first thing is leaders' role in setting clear goals and objectives. Good response. 70% of our respondents indicated that leaders actually contribute to goal setting and outcomes. They also provide coaching and development. Also a good score, really positive, 61%. But then if you start looking at, does leaders participate and do they have an impact in creating authentic and positive employee experiences? Although we've got a good response in terms of 65% of people that agreed, it is noteworthy that there's still 12% of people that don't agree with that. So leadership is driving that culture, and it's driving an employee-centric culture. And if they don't do it, a leader, here we have it. The leader is one who knows the way, who goes the way, and who shows the way. So we need our leaders to be on top, be in line with employee experience. In terms of the environment, it's also important for us to track how does the teams function? Is there sufficient team functioning across teams and within teams and departments? Good positive score, 74%. We're quite comfortable with the functioning across teams. And very encouraging that employees actually find themselves doing meaningful work. They are comfortable that they are doing meaningful work. 52% of our respondents indicated that they are actually allowed to experiment, which is just more than half. My worry is, what about the other half? Those that don't know if they are allowed to experiment and fail, and then those that disagree that they can experience or experiment and fail. Poll time. Just before we lead into psychological safety, let's get your view in terms of fear of victimization. Can you speak up? Can you speak up in your organization without any fear of victimization or retribution? We will share with you what Africa said, but let's see what our participants in the meeting has indicated. You're quick on the buzzers there. Almost on 50% of people responding. At this stage, it looks fairly positive. People feel, but it is spread quite wide. We're just on 70% of people that have participated. Okay. 75%, I think that's a good representation of people in the meeting. So positive responses overall, strongly agree. Those who agree strongly, on 21% of our responses said they can speak up without the fear of being victimized. So 34% agreed. So overall, 30, 40, 50, just over about 55% of people are quite comfortable that they can share their views without the fear of victimization. There are some that is neutral, that are not sure at this stage, and there are some that completely disagree. That's just on 20% and strongly disagree on 4%. That leads me to the sort of psychological safety aspect of culture and enablement. Dion, can you just close that poll?
It should be off now, Ronelle.
There you go. It's off on my side. Okay, so psychological safety, what do we mean by that? As Edmondson has put it, it's really felt permission for candor. So are you comfortable to speak up? And like we indicate on the responses here, 52% agreed that they are comfortable to speak up. But again, what worries me is that negative and the neutral component. If people are not convinced that they can speak up, there's definitely a lot of work to be done to actually work on getting people more comfortable to speak up. So in terms of culture, the more activity around people-centric cultures and creating people-centric cultures, we are making two recommendations. Our call to action is really to say, define your leadership capabilities or your leadership competencies as a first step. As an organization, if you want to start this journey, leadership is the place to start. Identify those competencies that you require in your business, that requires them to be successful, and develop those. And when you start seeing those type of behavior and people that excel in those competencies, recognize that, reward them, and promote those who portray those competencies well and who excel in them. Keep track of culture. You cannot move how you do things more towards becoming people-centric if you don't monitor it. Get a baseline, get professional support if you can, so that you know the actual elements is measured that you need to measure, and that is then your baseline to take it further.
Thanks so much, Ronelle. So I'll be dealing with the next trend, which is all about people practices. And the key message here is, if we consider the evolution of people practices globally, there is a lot of room required for change as far as the African continent is concerned. So there's a step change in many practices. And I think just the feedback around the knowledge around employee experience and understanding what it's all about, I think is a good example of where we need to focus a lot more attention. So in thinking about people practices, I wanted to create a slide that talks about what are some of the shifts that are required. And I want to speak a little bit from personal experience. I was the HR executive for a large insurance company for 5 years working across Africa. And if I reflect on some of the things that I would have done differently, I really think that I've over-governed a lot of the kind of people practice stuff. And it really stifles the opportunity for people to grow and get involved in the right way in people practices. So this is very much a kind of a self-reflection for me. So where I think we are currently and where we need to move is we've got to move away from over-engineered practices to practices that are simple and user-friendly. What we often create is these very thick policy manuals with complicated templates. And I think where we should be is a set of core principles and easy-to-use templates. I think we don't really help the forests in terms of our use of paper. We often print a lot of this stuff. There's reams of paper. We've got to move it online. We've got to make it easy for people to use. Very high levels of approval. And so I've seen levels and levels and levels of approval for really simple things. And I think we've got to move to purposeful governance. And then very lastly, we often create fear and take a lot of time in our practices. And I think we've got to move to practices that are inspired, that motivates and enables performance. And I think that's a challenge for every HR practitioner out there, is how do we move towards where the future should be? So I'm going to highlight a couple of people practices that we looked at in the study and just share some trends with you. So I think the first one that I want to focus on is all about onboarding or induction. So what we found here is that if we consider the onboarding practice and whether it enables new employees to reach early productivity, 66% of respondents said, yes, we are able to do that. Where I think some of the negative views come in, first of all, is that the company does not create co-creation in establishing your process of onboarding. Only 43% of companies said we actually co-created with new joiners. Use of technology, only 43% effectively uses technology. And then very lastly is, do we actually go back to people that have joined and said, what was broken in this process? As consumers of the process, it would seem obvious that those are the people that we want to ask. And only 37% of respondents said, we actually go back to people that have started and ask them what we could improve. Learning and development, I think, has gone full hybrid. So on the left-hand side, you can see the kind of sources of how we deliver learning. It's Zoom, it's Teams, it's sometimes face-to-face, it's coaching and mentoring. So we really have progressed to a full hybrid model as far as L&D is concerned. What was really encouraging for me is to see that people feel, generally speaking, that there are equal opportunities. So 70% of respondents said there are equal opportunities. But where we have seen a lot of need in our business and where we've done some work is in the space of career pathing. So only 43% of respondents say that our learning opportunities actually link to some kind of career pathing process. And so why is career pathing important? And on the left-hand side, you can see a model that we actually built for a client. This was for a game ranger, and we're using this with their permission. Some of the key benefits of having career paths is just providing clarity on where you're moving from a directional point of view to give you clarity on what are the competencies needed, not only for your current job, but also for where you want to move to. It really is a key enabler in planning your career development. And I think it sends a very, very strong message internally that we are serious about development. So we would definitely encourage companies to think beyond learning and how does this learning fit from a career pathing perspective. Reward is always a hot topic. And so when we think about reward, I think it is important to start looking at total reward. Total reward sometimes is also known as employee value proposition. And so reward functions are no longer just focused on money and benefits. So if you think about total reward, and that's the picture on the right-hand side, total reward really talks about compensation, it talks about benefits, but we're also talking about things like career development, around well-being, and purpose. A lot of people want to work for organizations that have a clear purpose beyond making money. So unfortunately, only 44% of responses have said that our organization have adopted a total rewards approach to managing, in this kind of environment. 41% of organizations have said we use some non-traditional, reward mechanisms. And here we talk about things like recognition schemes, on-the-spot reward, appliance rentals, if you can think about that one, and things like long-term incentives and so forth. And what is really important is that very progressive organizations that have the systems to accommodate for this also allow flexibility in people being able to choose their own rewards. So as an example, to be able to flex my leave days up and down, to create my own bonus scheme. Only 18% of organizations are there. One of the key mechanisms and tools that we wanted to delve in a little bit more is the whole principle of short-term and long-term incentives. And what we are seeing across the continent is an increase in the ability to offer things like short-term and long-term incentives at more levels. So we're encouraged to see that, 62% of responses now say that they offer both short-term and long-term incentives in the form of variable pay. One of the key practices that have come through very strongly during the COVID period has been the issue of employee wellness. And I want to reflect on a study that was conducted in South Africa specifically, and it's by no means a proxy for the continent, but I did find some of these stats a little bit shocking. So if we look at the study, they're saying that 15% of the workforce takes leave on a regular basis. So that's about 6 million people. And absenteeism in South Africa is somewhere between 3.5% and 6%. And if you look at what that means from a productivity perspective, it accounts for about 280 million days, that is lost through productivity as far as this is concerned. And then there's some interesting stats around, how we look at this from a male and female perspective, where we find a lot more cases amongst females, and a lot of it as relates to depression. So employee wellness is, for me, one of the kind of areas that we haven't done well on this year. So it's a little bit disappointing. 48% of respondents said that we actively track the state of wellness in our organizations. And when we say, do you have a wellness strategy in place? If we look across the 3 years in 2021, that was 61% of companies had some kind of wellness strategy in place. 2022, it went up to 71%. And this year, sadly, again, it dropped back to 67%. And so on the right-hand side, you can see some of the practices that companies are focused on as far as wellness is concerned. Then hybrid working. So hybrid working has been a very hot topic in our organization. As an example, we don't have offices. Everybody works from home. And so what we are seeing across the continent is more traditional approaches coming back. And so we'll talk about the 4-day work week shortly. But if you look at companies reporting around just people having to be in the office, last year, 30% of companies said our employees have to be in the office, and that has increased to 43%. So an increase in percentage here for me personally is a negative. We want people to have the right level of flexibility. Can employees choose to work from the office has also dropped from 23% to 18%. Companies that have introduced a shift system, which was across Africa a well-known system to deal with COVID, that has actually dropped from 30 to 24. And my sense is that we've actually taken away the flexibility because people need to be in the office. And the number around people working from home is still at 3%. So definitely a lost opportunity for me as far as hybrid working is concerned. 4-day work week, to be totally honest, I was actually surprised that 7% of respondents have already migrated to a 4-day work week. And so I think there's big promise in trying to understand what a 4-day work week would look like. And in doing some research for the presentation, there's some very real benefits. So I'm going to share a short video that positions the 4-day work week in a bit more detail.
Put away the laptops and the hard hats. The American work week may be headed for the most profound change in nearly 100 years, with more companies shifting from a 5-day week to 4.
It's been life-changing. Really, it's been a wonderful experience.
Crowdfunding platform Kickstarter went from 5 to 4 days last year, hoping to offer a better work-life balance and retain valuable employees. Surprise! The company says productivity increased, employees better rested and more engaged.
People are able to spend time with their families and spend time doing things they love, and they're happier at work and better at work as a result.
Similar findings from a large study involving 61 British companies that went to 4-day, 32-hour weeks last year. 92% say they're sticking with 4 days. 71% reported employees were less stressed and burned out, most saying they're better able to balance home and family commitments, while company revenues actually increased by 35% on average. Researchers say the flex hours that came with the pandemic accelerated the paradigm shift, with many employees, not just white-collar workers, getting more free time. And now, 15% say no amount of money will convince them to go back to 5 days.
In the United States, we got a 5-day work week in the 1930s, and the pandemic really accelerated the thinking. It sort of opened employers' eyes to the idea that they could put in an innovation like this.
So far, larger companies have been slow to embrace the change, some concerned that customer service will suffer. Because once you go to 4 days, it's hard to ask employees to work 5. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
So very interesting around the 4-day work week and some food for thought. So I'm going to close out with a final slide from my side, just some recommendations as far as people practices are concerned. I think the first thing is that you've got to do practice, and there's a fair amount of research available online to find out what's happening in the world of people practices. You've got to gather data. A lot of this data can be gathered internally by regularly doing snap surveys around each of these practices. Benchmark, speak to other companies, find out what they're doing in your own country, but also wider. And very importantly, the most important part for me is to co-create. If you want to think about creating the right kind of onboarding experience, go and talk to people and co-create with people that have started with your organization. So over to you, Runel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dion. On to trend number 3. So we've said that there's been a shift from employee engagement, an employee engagement mindset, to an employee experience mindset. So let's look at a short clip to just outline. I think this is probably the best clip that I've seen that compares employee engagement and employee experience. And it may just be what we need to get us all aligned in terms of what employee experience really is.
Now, for a while when I was writing my book, I thought that this notion of employee experience and employee engagement, I thought they were at odds with each other. I thought employee experience is replacing employee engagement, totally two unrelated different things. But the reality is that there's actually quite a bit of relationship between the two. Now, the problem that we've been seeing inside of most organizations around the world is that employee engagement is not the cause of something, it is the outcome of something. You cannot improve something by measuring the outcome. You improve something by measuring the cause. So the cause of an engaged workforce is the employee experience. You invest in the employee experience, you get an engaged workforce. When you have an engaged workforce, then you have the ROI.
Right. So where should we focus? Should we focus on measuring the cause, or should we focus on measuring the outcome? Employee engagement being the cause is really those moments that matter. So let's check on what our respondents indicated in terms of that. There has been a slight drop in the question in terms of, do you measure employee engagement? For us, that wasn't a negative necessarily, even though it has dropped, because we've seen a very increase in the activity relating to employee engagement. So we've seen SNAP surveys, we've seen pulse surveys being done. So the fact that companies are almost doing away with pure once-off surveys to track employee engagement, they are starting to see we need to tap in more regularly. And when we asked how committed leaders are, how committed do they believe their leaders are in creating, in participating and creating positive employee experiences, 62% indicated that their leaders are. It is worrying for me that there's almost 20% of leaders that is clearly not having an impact. And we've already indicated that leadership needs to be on board to improve employee experiences. If we move on, we continued and said, right, now that we know, there has been more increase in activity in terms of employee experience, What are the actual specific components and people practices that you believe as Africa, as our respondents, have the biggest impact? And that was clearly indicated: culture, employee development, onboarding, and a quality relationship with leaders. Those were the core practices that has been indicated as having the most impact. And I think one of the shifts that we've seen that was most encouraging for us is 77% of respondents indicating that someone in HR is now responsible for employee experience. So there has been a shift, that there's ownership taken. What are we saying in terms of the shift from employee engagement to employee experience? First of all, awareness, awareness, awareness. You have to build the case for employee experiences. We cannot keep measuring engagement, which is the outcome. We need to start tracking the cause, which is the process that leads up to an employee being engaged. And then start somewhere. I mean, Dion has reiterated the fact that we need to get points. Let's get data points. Engage our employees. Engage them to ask, what are the pain points that they're sitting with, and where are we sitting with quick wins? Forecast for performance management, like I've indicated, definite trend. It does look good. The forecast is good. The slide is quite busy, but I think a few highlights that I want to make on this slide. We've put this sort of timeline, or this line of principles we've put up even in our previous study. And we actually want to show you a little bit of the shift that's happened and why we're saying this is a positive. Performance management is moving towards the positive. We are still seeing that performance management is taking on performance enablement as it's shifting to enable people rather than being the stick and punishing people and not giving them the increase that they wanted because they did not perform. Definite increase in looking at outputs as opposed to activities, outputs or key results or objective stretch goals. That's typically what is being measured. Forced ranking is something of the past, which is I'm quite excited about. Development as a focus is also very positive. Team-based KPIs is also getting traction. So they are starting to make teams accountable for reaching certain outcomes. Multi-rater feedback, about a third of the respondents have adopted multi-rater feedback. And then technology, even though there's a drop in the intention to use technology better, I think the other elements and the focus on the behaviors and the focus on outputs is why we're seeing a slight drop in the technology. People want to get the practices right first before jumping to systems, but there is an intention to still use systems to the better. I think one element that surprised us slightly is the fact that our respondents indicated that they actually measure behavior on other levels than executives, or they are more prevalent there, which was surprising to us. I think you can maybe think about it a little bit, but it does seem to me that there is an overall focus on behavior. We would have just expected that it would be more so on executive levels. So for performance management, what are we recommending? Measure, benchmark and measure. Talk to colleagues, talk to fellow colleagues in industry, find out what's working, talk to your employees, find out what's working, make sure that you at least on an annual basis check in with leaders and employees to find out how are they experiencing performance management. Are those things that we've indicated as the positives of performance management, are you seeing that happening in your process? And then capability of leaders and managers. We have to start, it's HR's responsibility to have to equip leaders in having those difficult conversations. I feel performance management fail in many instances where leaders cannot have those difficult conversations. The final trend, people data evolution, definitely on the horizon. We cannot discuss HR and trends if we don't talk about data. Very important quote by Edward Deming. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And data is often, it's so dangerous. What do you want to measure? What do you want to see? On this slide, we've indicated just something like employee turnover, for instance. You would see in the responses still many respondents track, 12% of respondents still track employee turnover. But I mean, is that a high impact metric? Is a quick quit rate not perhaps a better metric to track? Yes, it's great to know that people are leaving, but how soon are they leaving? Are we failing in terms of the satisfaction of employees, or the expectations? Are we failing to meet their expectations? What does it tell us? So let's start looking at what is the metrics that we choose, why do we choose it, and what do we want to get out of it? If we then look at a couple of metrics, there's different ones that we can look at, but our ask is really that you spend some time on it and say, if I want to, let's take, for instance, development. Do I want to just track the cost of development? What information would that give me in terms of employee experience? Training cost as a percentage of total compensation, the promotion velocity, How long does it take for an individual to be promoted once they've been exposed to certain development interventions? How many of our internal people are we hiring? And what is the percentage of roles that have more than 3 successes, for instance? Is that not giving us more quality information in terms of our metrics? And I think we want to remind ourselves, why do we track metrics? Do we track how efficient we are? Or do we also track certain metrics to test the employee experience as well? We asked several questions, and I think it's reassuring for us to see that they are now starting to measure like snap surveys and taking data at different points. They measure on onboarding, they measure employee development. There's metrics on performance management, on employee wellness, on exit. It's encouraging for us to see that you are collecting data throughout these moments that matter. And then the fact that it's a multidisciplinary effort. It cannot only be HR. Yes, somebody needs to own and somebody needs to drive, but we need to have senior leadership involvement, executive involvement. We need to have a broad spectrum of people involved. Employee personas. When we start talking about data, we ask the question as well in terms of, are you keeping track of personas? Now, if we just look at Temi and Adora, they age differences. One is single, one is married, one is more quiet, prefers to be left alone. Temi is absolutely travel. She wants to explore the world. She likes talking to people. How do you think their personas influences how we design our employee experience? And now we are by no means saying you have to start tracking every individual and what they are like and start building employee experience journeys around that. But we are saying that you cannot use a blanket approach. 23% of our respondents indicated that they are familiar with the concept of employee personas. 20% of them indicated that they are using personas in developing their employee experience. I think the only message that I want to really bring across with this slide is you cannot just design one thing. And that's the reason why you want to involve several stakeholders and involve several inputs from employees so that we can design our employee engagement or employee experience journeys around that. Moments that matter, get sufficient information, get opinions, understand what are those points, that moments that matter to employees. And like Dion has also indicated in some of the other practices, co-create. When we start identifying measures, co-create, find out what are the things that matter to employees. Those have been through the process and others that are still then, that are currently joining the process. There's no harm in asking their opinion as well. Dion has indicated in the beginning that we've also taken an employee view. So let's maybe delve into that. Let's first ask you, can you indicate to us, has your organization actively worked on creating an employee experience? What is your view? I'm going to give some time to respond. Still quick on the buzzers. We're almost on 50%. It does look encouraging at this point. It does look like your organizations are starting to, create or design things around employee experience. They are actively working at creating positive employee experiences. Yeah, 40, 50, 56%. Very positive. Some are still neutral. I'm always worried about those neutrals. Those that are undecided. Often is the ones I think that we should be concerned about. But that's great. That more than half of the participants in this forum has also, experienced as an employee that their companies are implementing journeys. Right, the employee view. This is just to give you a bit of a outline on the respondents. They were from all over. There were some that indicated that they didn't want to necessarily disclose, like, for instance, the male-female representation of our participants. I think it was a fairly equal spread between managers, and some were senior managers, some were on administrative roles, others were entry level. So we really, I think, got a broad perspective. Most of them sort of in the category of 35 to 44, and slightly more females than males that participated in our employee view. And it's good for us to balance the perspective. Now that we know what the employers say, what does some of the employees on the African continent say? They do say caring leadership, 71% positive responses. They are enjoying to working at their company. 73% are positive. Their energy is high, but 66% feel that they cannot speak up. That they can speak up. 61% feel that the organization has created a culture that values people. So these are fairly low. We would want them to be slightly higher. And then the view on the efficiency and the people-centeredness of people practices is slightly more matured. 3 items stand out. These questions relate to regular feedback on performance, opportunities for learning, growth. They are in the lower area of 60%. So we would want that to be better, because that empowers, that creates an environment for employees where they feel that they are at the center of this journey. Right. Increased risk for employers. 52% of employees would stay with their company if they offered the same salary. 60% would recommend as a good place to work. Are we comfortable that only half of our employees would stay if they are offered slightly more money? I think there's definitely still some work to be done. Let me look at time. Yeah, we're just about 10 minutes from closing. Let's move into some closing remarks. We've introduced Temi and Adora. What do you think happened to Adora? Very clearly, Adora starts a new role on Monday, thanks to a referral from her sister Temi. She's moving. She's been dissatisfied. If that company has tracked that quick quit rate, Adora would be one of the statistics. She would not stay with that business, whereas Temi is thriving and she's having a blast. Some closing remarks. And Dion, I'm going to invite you back to perhaps just conclude on this with me. What we are saying, we're really saying start your journey by making somebody responsible. It's encouraging for us to see that HR is starting to, be there, starting to feature as the leaders in driving this process. We are saying gather data. By all means possible, do surveys, snap polls. Do not only stick to, year-end traditional engagement surveys. We're not saying throw that out, but make sure that it doesn't have to be major, surveys that you run. Quick polls and snap surveys is really something that we are saying. Dion, would you want to conclude on 3 and 4 for us?
Yeah, so I think it's, what's important for us is that employee experience is not only about HR, it's about facilities, it's about getting budget, it's about, making sure that you've got all the disciplines in the organization supporting it. So as much as HR is going to be the custodian of it, it really is a multidisciplinary effort. So things like, designing your office space could be part of it, where people park. So it really is a multidisciplinary effort. And then very lastly, leadership really sits at the core of this. So I'm a very firm believer that culture and employee centricity is created by managers and leaders. And so it's very important that we work with leaders and that we identify what are the moments that matter. So I think some really good guidance around where to start, and the model that we've created is really there for your benefit. It's a model that you can utilize to think about how you want to potentially structure a project that would focus on getting EX started. A lot of research available in addition to this paper now. There's a lot of stuff online. And so also feel free to reach out to us if you just want to have a chat or a conversation about it. So I think we want to open for any questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. I see there are some questions in the Q&A that we can talk about. The first one from Funmi, she's saying, my name is Funmi from Nigeria. I want to ask how to handle employees who are very indifferent about the experience that they get and just to want to get the work done and get out. Ronelle, do you have a perspective on this one? A bit of a challenging, tricky question. How do we deal with indifferent employees?
Definitely. I think that in itself tells you something, just get on with it. Not everybody is about the warm and the fussy and the experience. There are some that just want to get the job done. So I think it's again around flexibility, have that option for those that want to just log on, get their stuff in, get their, sign their papers, etc. Again, it's about those having a little bit of flexibility for those who prefer very task orientated to just get the job done, in my view.
Thank you. Second question, what methods do you use to retain employees in an organization? The answer is, what do employees want? So this is the question around co-creation and asking people what they want. So to offer people more money is not necessarily going to retain them. And what will keep me at an organization is not necessarily what will keep Ronel and what will keep Nicole there. So it's important then to start looking at this principle of employee personas. So if you've identified your different employee personas, then you can start understanding what is it that's important for them. So if you ask me what would keep me at a company, I want to boost my pension savings. I've got 9 or 10 or 11 years to retirement. I want to make sure that I'm saving. For me, development might not be that important. But for other colleagues, they might be all focused around, will you pay for my MBA? Will you sponsor me in terms of my development? So it's not a simple answer. You need to actually go out and understand the people that you're working with, build the personas, and then make sure that you build your proposition around it. So in recent years, we've spoken about employee value proposition, and employee value proposition is now migrated into more of an individual value proposition. So I think we can probably take one more question. There's a question here, and I'll leave it for you to answer. Ronel, it says, how do you sell employee experience to an organization's global people function when they appear to be more compliance focused? So how do we kind of build this case for change when an HR function is compliance focused? And I'll leave that one to Ronel to answer.
You give me all the difficult ones, Dion, but I'm going to try my best.
On purpose.
When we say compliance focused, I would assume that they are, risk will, we say, do you sell this concept positively, or do you warn people about the risks? Now, if it's a very compliance focused people function, I would get data. I would get data about the quick quit rate, the risks that they are facing because they are not tracking employee experience. And in that way, almost sell that concept of employee experience being the cause and then engagement being the outcome, is to sort of gather sufficient data about those points of employee experience, and then say, if we don't work on this, we would have a risk in terms of we won't get the returns that we want, and we will just leave, have good people exit our business. So I'd go to warn them, scare them with the risks.
Right, there's 2 quick questions we can deal with. There's a question from Joaquin, were there big differences between countries? So in all honesty, we haven't done specific analysis on country level. It's something that can be done. I'll be in Uganda presenting at the East Africa Symposium in November. And what I would do in preparation for that event is definitely to pull East Africa data to see if there are substantial differences. So the data is available. We just haven't done the in-depth analysis. And then, Ronel, a last question for you. Comment, scheduling data gathering, particularly after good feed events like bonuses. So the question is, if you gather data after doing things like salary increases and bonuses, do you think that is an emotional result? Is it a good idea to gather data during those events to find out where people are at?
I think the mere fact that you are asking the question is great, because it tells me that you are thinking about the data that you're collecting, and when you are collecting the data and what that data is going to tell you. So with that in mind, I think it's a great question. I would be wary of, doing these type of snap surveys or polls right around increases and stuff like that. Now, the contrary is also true. It might not have been a great increase and you might get a very negative response, or then a very positive response if those increases were well received. But so I would think twice about, gathering data around those specific events. But good question. Thinking about the timing, I think it's great.
Thank you so much. So we are going to be closing the webinar at this point. Thank you so much for joining. We had about 187 people on the line. Just in closing, in the chat box, Oliver's shared a link to our website, to our WhatsApp group. We run a Pan-Africa WhatsApp group. We've got close on 700 people on the WhatsApp group. So if you are keen to join it, feel free to click on the link. And as already mentioned, we will make the webinar together with material and the report available this afternoon for download. There's a full report of about 60 pages that really covers the content of the study, and it is available for free for download on our website this afternoon. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Ronelle, thank you so much for co-presenting with me, and have a good afternoon to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.